Welcome to Growth with Portia, a weekly conversation for your personal and professional growth. Here is your host, Portia Booker.
Hey listeners, welcome to Group Portia. I'm your host, Portia Booker, and yes, this is my real name. So, question for you, did you bring your curious mind today? If so, I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's dive in. So today, I am joined by a mission-driven community leader who has dedicated her life to serving Northeast Ohio's most vulnerable children. She is the CEO of PEP, which stands for Positive Education Program, and also the host of No Crystal Stair podcast, a space held for Black mothers raising Black sons to fully express both the challenges and cherishable moments of motherhood. So welcome to Group Portia, Miss Habeebah Rasheed Grimes. How you doing today, Miss Habeebah?
I am well, Portia. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you.
Look, for me, it is truly an honor to sit in this space with you. I always love to, Habeebah, start my conversations with gratitude. What are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for presence. I'm grateful for presence in my body and an awareness of where I am in space and time and just some connection to that. I'm grateful for presence with my family, my children, my husband, my community. I'm grateful for presence in a time of need. And I'm speaking that into existence because this time of need has been so intense. And yet there is much to be grateful for. And I'm grateful to be in this space with you and in community with another mission and purpose-driven individual in our community.
Yes, Habeebah, I got to ask this, in the world that we live in today, we are so connected to all of the social trends, whether it's social media, whether it's things going on in Hollywood, the music, but we're disconnected from ourselves. And so, Habeebah, for you, I want to go back to what you mentioned about being present. How do you maintain your presence in every day and every single engagement, whether it's with your children, your family, and even when you're at work, when we're often so bombarded that it's hard for us to remain in that state of presence? How do you do it every single day?
For me, it requires a great deal of intention. I am someone who can get inside my head and get stuck there and get preoccupied with all of the intense and historical and challenging realities and just get stuck on a loop in that space. And so for me, breath work has been essential, connecting with my breath in moment to moment, really, in a moment of stress, but also in moments of rest, really feeling the breath move through my body, the energy of that breath and the oxygen associated with that breath. So really experiencing this molecular exchange and being present with that. Um, the other things that are helpful for me are stories and being present with other folks who are sharing their stories, whether in a personal or professional space. Our stories are how we share our experience of the world, how we describe how the world is impacting us and how we are either intending to impact the world or concerned about our impact on the world. And so I love stories. I love sitting at dinner with my sons and hearing about their day and drawing that story out of them. I love to be connected with people as they describe their experiences of the world or whatever it is that might be the moment's reality. And then the other thing that keeps me present is connecting with thought, connecting with ideas. So a good book either being listened to or read directly, and shout out to you for your recent audiobook publication. That helps me too to understand that I am part of a bigger world, a bigger ecosystem, and part of a trajectory of history, and I'm not alone. When I get into the space of worry, it helps me know I'm not alone.
Oh, 100%. Habiba, I'm the same way. I love hearing people's stories. I love hearing how they went from this space of a test to a testimony, and they've learned to enjoy the journey instead of asking themselves, oh, why does this keep happening to me? They've reached that space of what is this trying to teach me, and how can I take this mess that's going on in my life and turn it into a message for the masses. And that was kind of the same thing that I did with my audiobook, Finding Grace Within Grief, her transition, my transformation, because I realized that all of us go through grief. Grief is no stranger to any of us. But the thing of it is, we tend to get stuck in it because of the societal narrative that, oh, grief, you don't want to go through it. It's all of these bad things. But for me, the grief journey for me was like a door opening. It was letting go of all these different ideologies and principles that I had been spoon fed since I was a child. And now that I'm an adult, I'm like, I don't think I really resonate with that anymore. I want to change this. I want to change, this trajectory in my thought, in my belief, in my whole entire being, and turn it into a space of optimism instead of pessimism. So it truly for me was an opportunity, like an egg being cracked open and put into the skillet and fried. It truly paved the way for me to step into a space that I probably wouldn't have if I would have continued to be that full-time caregiver of my mom. But that's for a whole nother day. Habiba, I always love to learn, one, how people land in the mental wellness space. So can you share with our listeners what really sparked your interest in stepping into that arena?
It is young people who inspired me to step in the space of first mental health, right? And understanding developmental processes as it relates to mental health, and also to mental challenges, mental health challenges. And so I have to just acknowledge that in growing up and witnessing in my own family and in my community, folks struggling with significant mental health needs and challenges, I was first compelled to try to understand what might help young people grow into adults who have stronger mental health and wellness as a result of the experiences of healing interactions in childhood. So it has been young people and I'll say our struggles, because I know my younger self well. I connect with her often. I listen to her story when I need to. And my own brother, who struggled with mental health challenges as a kid. And for especially Black boys, the narrative is that they're bad and they need physical punishment and they need other forms of harsh punishment in order for them to grow into the adult that we desire them to be. And so I just had an inherent belief that that was wrong, that children experiencing violence and harm as a source of like correcting behavior was wrong. And because I grew up in a race conscious household where my mom told us much about the history of African people in America, I knew that there was this inheritance that was harmful, that found its origins on the shores of West Africa, the transatlantic slave trade routes, and then on the plantations of this nation. And so I wanted to explore the possibilities around young people being well without all of that. My story of actually becoming a mental health professional is like a long one, so I won't get too deep into that here. But what I will say is, in finding the work of serving young people with complex mental health needs and seeing the overrepresentation of Black children and especially Black boys in this work, the other thing that emerged very quickly but evolved over many years, my 20-year career, is the importance of the adults being well in the lives of children. And it was parents who first influenced my thinking in that regard, and it was mothers. And working directly in parent education and support groups with mothers, seeing their stories and seeing how information helped to transform their way of thinking about themselves and their children, and understanding development in a new way. Seeing that transformation planted a seed in me that gave me inspiration that today is planted, is a flowering tree that uplifts mothers and uplifts our well-being, trauma and adversity and violence, that there divinity in us and power that we can tap when we are well, when we have our physical and mental and spiritual health well and in alignment.
Oh, 100%, Habeebah. I think, you hit the nail on the head when there's so many children that are unfortunately born into these adverse circumstances. And then, of course, when you mention about being connected to your younger self, that inner child, a lot of us are still adults. I'm working through that currently, reconnecting with my inner child, healing her and my relationship with her. And look at all the adults, especially mothers, who have buried that part of them because of society's pressure, societal's influence, the whole assimilation approach. And so we have so many adults who are still children, unfortunately, in their thinking and in their actions towards every aspect of their life. And so, Habeebah, for our listeners who are tuning in, if they want to learn to reconnect with their inner child, with their inner self, where can they start today? Does it start with journaling? Does it start with, visiting with a trusted friend? Where does it start to really begin to heal that relationship?
I think it starts in relationship to self. And we have to first acknowledge how many distractions there are from us being connected with ourselves. When I was a kid, my mom was like, that TV, that boob tube, it's going to drain all of your thought and all of your imagination. She would, be really like frustrated about how much time we spent on TV. And here we are today with little TVs, little essentially computers in our hands, in front of our faces at all times. So I would compel the listeners to spend some time with yourself, spend some time feeling your body, feeling where things are uncomfortable, feeling what you might be struggling with at a personal, physical, or emotional level, and start to think back to, when did that start? When did I first experience that? I think that can happen best or most impactfully in relationship to a therapist. So first, just acknowledging that help and support are something we all need. I think the people of the global majority who've experienced enslavement and genocide and colonialism, like, therapy should be free and we should all be able to get access to it. And I know that is not the case for everyone. So if you can, in relationship to a trusted other, begin to talk about, I feel a lot of anxiety sometimes. And when I think about when I first started to feel anxiety, I was 8 years old. And this is the story attached to that experience. And being able to really visualize your 8-year-old self and the shame or guilt or sense of responsibility that you might feel, and forgive and acknowledge that shouldn't have been your work. So much of our childhood struggles are attached to experiences where, as children, we felt a sense of responsibility for something that really was not our responsibility. It was the work of the adults in our life to protect or to prevent or to provide. And for many reasons, those things don't always happen, especially in a culture that enables racism and poverty. And so there is a way, I think, to get to that place of self-compassion and grace, especially for your younger self, without trying to unpack all of the related impacts of the adults in your life. Just getting in right relationship with that younger version of yourself. And there are probably points in your development, in each of our development, where there are new or compounding incidents that we need to spend some time with, simply loving on the child that we were and telling them, I love you. It's okay. We are okay. We are going to be okay. And reminding ourselves that that child was lovable and divine and miraculous and amazing and allowed us to get to where we are today.
100%, and really believing it in your heart too. Like they say, words can go a bunch of miles, but it's the action and true feeling that goes the extra mile. So we're going to take a quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. Everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm joined remotely with Habeebah Rasheed Grimes. We were just having a great conversation, of course, about healing our inner child and reconnecting with that younger self. So Habeebah, we were really continuing on the dialogue of our inner child, our inner self, and really mending that relationship, right? Because it tends to unfortunately fester and bleed into our adult life. I like to say water trickles down, not up. And so, Habeebah, for our listeners who are tuning in, I want to touch on this a little bit. I want to touch on trauma for a moment, because let's be honest, that is a umbrella that tends to get a lot of things housed underneath it. And so, Habeebah, what would you say is your definition of trauma?
The definition of trauma that I often rely on when I speak in community is one from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse, Mental Health and Addiction Services Administration of the U.S. federal government. That definition, I think, captures a multitude of types of experiences that we can have that resonates for me. So trauma can be an event, a set of circumstances, a series of events. And what trauma does is different for us as individuals. And so it's how we as an individual experience an event, a series of events or a set of circumstances that really determines like the possibility for traumatization. And so we often conflate trauma and traumatization as a culture. So there was this event, right? A car accident that was a trauma. The brain and body of the individuals involved responded with this surge of neurological and biological processes, including the release of hormones and the experience of the body that this was dangerous. This was a life-threatening event. But not everyone who experiences the trauma of a car accident is going to experience traumatization. And traumatization is defined essentially, and I'm going to reference Bessel van der Kolk's definition for traumatization here. It is the circumstances of an event exceeding the resources, internal and external, of the person impacted. And so when something happens, like a car accident, while you are also, let's say, physically ill, you might have a chronic illness going on, or you may have just suffered a tremendous loss. And so physically and mentally, you have not been able to take care of yourself as well. So your body's in this compromised state. And so the resources available to you as an individual might be compromised. Maybe you don't have a lot of family or supports, that kind of thing. And when that happens, you will likely experience what this description of traumatization is, right? Where things are outside of the resources that you have available. And so you start to experience the negative impacts of that trauma. What is often left out in any of these kinds of ideas is that trauma that happens to us in periods of resource when we have healthy relationships, what I call relational wealth, kind of drawing on this idea of that Dr. Bruce Perry has talked about, relational poverty. When we have relational health, people we are connected to, who themselves have the resource and capacity to support us, trauma itself, we can be resilient to it. We can move through it. We will experience the immediate impacts, but we can move through it more healthfully. When we don't have that kind of support, trauma is more likely to cause traumatization. And when we experience this kind of adversity in childhood, the earlier in our life we have these events occurring, series of events, sets of circumstances occurring, the more likely it is that they will have a lasting impact on our brain and body, because of the nature of childhood being this rapid pace of development happening that causes the body and brain to organize around our circumstances. The other thing that's often left out is when there is trauma in childhood. So we hear a lot about the adverse childhood experiences study. When those events happen in childhood, the chronicity or the frequency of them, how often, how prolonged are they? We are not often thinking about how prolonged and intense and the timing of a traumatic event is impacting how that brain is organizing, that body is organizing around those experiences. So we have to begin to think a little more broadly about trauma and what trauma can be, right? And include that set of circumstances, right? Racism, poverty, the sociological factors, in addition to abuse and neglect and household dysfunction, so to speak. I use air quotes there because that is the language that the adverse childhood experiences study uses. But I argue we should think more broadly. We also should be thinking about how much care and resource and support does an individual have before we start making decisions about whether someone is traumatized by an event or series of events or set of circumstances.
Well, I 100% agree with that, Habeebah. I mean, because trauma, I like to say, is kind of unique to each individual, right? We can both have, for example, we could both go through a divorce, but one of us may have some traumatic remnants from the divorce, while the other person is celebrating being free from this, situation with a narcissist. So either way, it's that uniqueness to it. And I love what you brought up just now, Habeebah, about trauma in children. And let's be honest, with you working with a multitude of young people, how do you keep that balance where you're not taking on their trauma while listening to their engagement and interaction with you? How do you maintain that? And if you find yourself in a situation where you're triggered, how do you handle that and keep the balance for yourself?
I'm at a point in my career where I am not hearing directly from parents and young people, caregivers or young people, the traumas that those young people have experienced directly. So my heart is with my colleagues who do that work day to day, hearing the stories of trauma and traumatization that are reflected in the stories of the children we serve. When I reflect on my time doing that work, for me, it's again about being connected to the body, allowing myself to feel that intense heartache. It's dangerous for us to get to a place as providers, as advocates, as leaders, whatever, where we don't have empathy and compassion, where we hardened our heart to the point just to be able to keep hearing the stories, or doing the work. We've hardened our heart to a point where we are numb, or we are not feeling the compassion and empathy. So to me, it is important to feel and to be with. And sometimes your eyes will fill up with tears. And for me, it is okay to be present in relationship to someone who is sharing a painful story. I also think that breath work, again, here is essential, and allowing ourselves to have that self-regulating capacity so that when we are in relationship to someone and we're hearing a difficult and story of trauma, that we can regulate our nervous system and remain present, because this is their story and we don't want to prioritize our emotions. The other thing that I argue is important is getting into relationship with someone who is expert and practiced in mental health and wellness, either coaching or psychotherapy or health and wellness, because you need a place to process these things. And I believe that no matter where we are in these systems, either in the direct care role or in administrative or leadership roles or in advocacy spaces, we need a place to process the heaviness of the work. Unfortunately, our systems are not designed to prioritize health and well-being. And so a lot of people are showing up within a lot of pain. And we need places as helpers in that space, as folks who support these folks who are in most need of help and support. We need a space so that we can release and process and deal with our own stuff. A lot of us who show up in the space of delivering mental health services, doing mental health and wellness work, we have our own histories of trauma, and we are disproportionately higher, probably, I'm going to say that with some assurance, that disproportionately higher rates of our own adversity in childhood and throughout our lifetime. And we need to be sure we are taking care and working on that healing of our inner child and our current selves, again, so that we can be in right relationship with the people we serve and really able to prioritize their health and their healing.
Habeebah, I love how you touched on, especially in our community, where it's still that barrier of seeking help for mental wellness obstacles. And how can we overcome that, Habeebah? Because I tend to still find that there's so many people who are resistant to seeking professional help because of that continuous drip of the stereotype. How can we work through that as a community? How can we be more just a listening ear and encourage each other to seek help from the professional, because that's what they're there for? I mean, I had to kind of break that stigma for myself, because after my mom had transitioned, I was kind of a lost soul at sea. And I'm thankful, knock on wood, my therapist found me organically. Because if my therapist didn't find me organically, truthfully, I don't know where I'd be. I probably wouldn't still be hosting my show right now. And so, Habeebah, how can we encourage more people to seek that professional help and go beyond the stigma and the stereotype to really prioritize their well-being?
There are simple answers to that question that I know folks have probably heard 100 times. What I will say is we have to acknowledge that we live in an ableist society. We live in a society that does not value the diverse and broad continuum of ways of being that human beings actually express in our world. And so there is this history of ableism that has resulted in folks having diagnoses or labels, and there's been marginalization as a result of diagnoses and labels. So as someone who works in this field, I personally feel it's important that as a field, we acknowledge the ways in which we have been complicit or contributed to the stigma that exists. It did not happen on its own, right? And so as leaders and advocates, it feels important to just know the history, know the legacy that we inherit in doing our work. I think there's stigma overall, right? We live in an ableist society. And then there's stigma within different groups of individuals who have also experienced different kinds of harm from the mental health system. And so that is just, for me, important foundational understanding. And I just encourage us who are in the mental health and wellness advocacy space that we do a little bit of a deep dive and understand that history. For me, then from there, it's living by example. being truthful about our personal struggles as we are doing our advocacy work, being transparent about the ways in which we seek help when we're doing our advocacy work. I want to live by example, lead by example. I want my children, my family, my community to know that I struggle and that I seek help in support of my struggles. I seek help from my family in support of struggles that we may have, and that in seeking that help, there is nothing wrong with us. We are human beings existing on this continuum of human possibilities, and we need help and support along the way. And we've always had, as human beings, the ability for healers or medicinal plants or other or spiritual practices that helped us be as healthy as possible in relationship to the world. So the mental health the practice of mental health work is not new. It is in a new configuration, and there's trust to be rebuilt based on the history and the legacy. Know that folks like me and you, we out here doing the work to ensure that this current system of mental health support and healing is accountable to community members and is a safe place to seek help.
Absolutely, absolutely, Habeebah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have to lead by example, right? Because when we lead by example, when someone else sees that there's a different way, whether they obviously have spoken it in their heart, kind of like you, I want to see a difference. I don't want to continue to see the same prescriptive narrative continue to infect the community. And we're leading by example, saying, yes, I do struggle, but I also seek help. So we're going to take a quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. Everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm doing remotely with Habeebah Rasheed Grimes, and we were just continuing a conversation, of course, around mental wellness and working through the stigmas. So, Habeebah, for our listeners who are tuning in, if they want to connect with you and learn more about you, is there a website or social media handle you can share with us today?
Absolutely. So there's a few ways you can get in touch with me. The first is by way of my website, HabeebahRGrimes.com. You can reach out directly to me there. I can get an email from that webpage, and you can also subscribe for content to come. I also can be reached on Twitter at Habeebah Grimes, same handle on Instagram. Those are kind of the two primary public social media sites that I'm on. So I do respond to direct messages on both those sites. And then through my podcast webpage as well, or I should say Instagram page and Twitter page as well.
Excellent, excellent. So you guys can definitely connect with Habeebah, just, either one of the channels, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, direct website, whatever flits your fancy, whatever that works. Habeebah, I want to talk about your podcast, No Crystal Stair. I mean, you've created this platform for Black mothers raising sons to really share their experience on living in a society where the influence comes from not just only their legacy, but also the society that we encompass as well. Like what you mentioned about, Black boys, quote unquote, are bad if they don't sit down in schools, and if they're a little too hyper, then they should be placed on certain medications and things like that. So Habeebah, share with our listeners, kind of what was the premise behind the No Crystal Stair podcast? Did you find that there wasn't enough Black mothers who were given an open platform to really be vulnerable about their experience raising sons and, how society plays a role in that. And also, let's be honest, in our society today, there tends to be a lot of targeting, in certain arenas. So share with our listeners about that today, Habeebah.
Yeah, I first started to, and thank you for asking, because this is a joy in my life. I first started to conceive of a podcast in about 2019, and I'm an pretty avid podcast listener. So some of the OGs of podcasting I've been listening to them and loving their work, and I love that environment of storytelling, right? So in 2019, I started to conceive of an idea for a podcast supporting Black mothers to boys, and thought initially it would be like a friend and I doing this show, and that didn't come to fruition. And so I just kind of I had this treatment that I had mocked up, and I just held on to it, and I was like, the person I want to do this with, it's not going to happen, and that means it just has to not happen, I guess, and just be a thing that I dreamed of, right? And then 2020 happened. And in the course of 2020, we're dealing with the pandemic. We're seeing the disproportionate impact yet again on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Seeing the rates of death and illness be higher for those groups who have these histories of marginalization. And then George Floyd was murdered. And I sank into some despair during that time, and frankly, grief. I think part of the problem we are living with in our culture is disenfranchised grief. So I will just say that we don't give grief room. We don't honor it. We don't give it the divine space and sacred space that it deserves. We just keep it moving. So people are dying of COVID, debilitated, children losing caregivers, and people losing community members. And then George Floyd is murdered, and everyone is watching this video on loop, and it's on the news, and this man is crying out for his mother. And I was in despair. We've been witnessing Black bodies be broken and destroyed on cell phone video for years now. And not enough is changing. From vigilantes to police violence, we've just seen this level of disregard for human life, for Black life, and until 2020, a resistance to even say Black lives matter. And that despair was starting to influence how I was thinking about my sons, and I was like more fearful than I had been, right? If that's even possible, after Trayvon Martin's loss, Tamir Rice's loss, Philando Castile, we can go on, and these are the ones that for me were like planting the seed of despair and fear. And George Floyd, his loss just really pushed me over an emotional edge. So I gave that room. I let myself grieve and be enraged, and I let myself start to speak out more directly and explicitly around how racism is traumatizing children, traumatizing families and communities, and just starting to use my voice. And right around the winter solstice of 2020, I was doing meditation regularly and really tapped in and connected with my divine self, tapped in with the creator, tapped in for those downloads. And I started to see a path forward for the podcast where I did it myself. I went out there and found and got into conversation with Black women who all were just emerging in my life, who were parenting sons, and with an eye not toward the trauma of Black motherhood, but an eye toward the beauty in it, the things to celebrate, the resilience in us, while acknowledging the conditions that demand that resilience, which are unjust. We are showing up in beautiful ways and creating legacies for our sons that are not destruction and death. And that I started to see the path forward and just made it happen.
Habib, I got to ask this as a mother of two sons, because your sons are not adults. They're still under your roof and under your reign. And what do you celebrate every single day with your sons? Is it their diverseness? Is it their curiosity to learn more? Is it the openness that you have with them? What do you celebrate with your sons?
As they are now kind of in that elementary and upper elementary stage, I celebrate their innocence. I celebrate that they don't know violence in our home. I celebrate that we, as their parents, my husband and I, John, he and I are working hard to parent in ways that are counter to the narrative that you are a risk or are at risk, that you are a threat or at threat. We see their beauty. They are amazing, creative, insightful, brilliant, energized, creative boys, and loving, um, generous. They have these amazing qualities that we want to continue to uplift and celebrate in them. They are also willful. They will tell you how they feel or what they think. They will offer critique, of the world that they live in. They will notice when we are out of alignment with what it is we say we want them to do and what we are doing. And we also give room and space for them in that regard, right? In our house, I don't believe in, children should be seen and not heard. We aren't transmitting that idea that was given to us. We're allowing for their expansiveness, and because they are so brilliant and insightful, we are navigating their understanding of race and race, the impacts of racism and their Black identities, and the ways in which racism becomes internalized, and they are understanding all of that. That's how we're equipping them, choosing to equip them for the world that they are encountering.
And I love that, Habiba, just all of the innocence, that children encompass and embody, because in the world we live in today, you almost have to put up filters, right? With social media, with TikTok. I mean, everything is out there, unfortunately, like dirty laundry. And so I'm happy to hear that you're celebrating their innocence, allowing them to be children, be curious, and just explore, right? And so, Habiba, I got to ask this: which one of your sons, maybe both, really kind of takes on your personality? Which one do you see may step into the podcast space like you one day?
That's so funny. I see both of them in me. So I'll say my oldest is already a content creator. He really digs Minecraft and he has a YouTube channel. And he changes the name often, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the name of it is right now. But he really is into creating, and he is like me in that way. Like, there's organized chaos going on in his room, and I have to teach him the same way I have to practice for myself. Like, you got to declutter a bit and organize. It will help your mental health. It will help you feel better, because he, like me, is an internalizer. And then my youngest is a brilliant speaker. Like, his use of vocabulary and his way of articulating what he sees in the world. We'll be sitting at dinner at least once or twice a week, and everybody is like, did he just really say that? He's 8. Like, that was dope what he just said. Did y'all hear that? Like, we have those moments with him, and I find that relatable. Always was a kid who kind of um had that was called like this wise soul. She's been here before, because of the way that I use language and describe things or pointed things out. So it's cool to see both of them, see myself in both of them.
And I love that, because you're able to, one, engage with them in a different capacity, right? You're able to still appreciate their individuality, but also you're like, okay, they didn't fall too far from the main tree. So I'll be grateful in that sense. So we're gonna take another
Yes.
quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. Well, Habeebah, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, to really shed some light on how we can, one, better prepare and also really shift our mindset around mental wellness, around healing our inner child, and also having that relationship. Especially, I'm not a mother myself, but I'm sure other mothers who are tuning in can really take some tips and feedback from, giving their kid the platform to be curious, to celebrate those little things, like you said, the innocence, their differences, and also the commonalities that they take from you and their father, and also their uniqueness. And you're able to really talk about that at the table. I really appreciate you shedding light on that, Habeebah. And so for our listeners, Habeebah, I got to ask this, mental health, as I mentioned in the beginning, is still very taboo, especially in our communities. And so how do you, Habeebah, have dialogue with your sons about that? What's some ways that parents can, have conversation with their kids about mental health? Does it start with, hey, how was your day today? Are you feeling a little sad? Or, I noticed that you weren't playing with this particular toy or something. How do you address it in your home or have dialogue? And then how can other parents, open that discussion pool?
So in our household, mental health is part of our overall sense of well-being. It is not separate and apart from eating healthy foods or getting exercise or not watching too much TV, right? So we have been talking with the boys about taking care of their inner life and getting help if they feel like they are overwhelmed in terms of things that are happening in their inner life or in relationship to other people. um, Getting that help early, getting that help often. But I've been teaching them breath work since they were toddlers because of how essential that is. Touch in our household, hugs and cuddles and massage. My oldest son loves a head massage. Those are strategies we've been using since they were very, very young. Um, and in terms of like psychoeducation and education about what mental health is, we, especially me, talk about that a lot. And we talk about it, when I talked about trauma earlier, the definition, I forgot one essential piece that is not part of SAMHSA's definition, which is transgenerational trauma and how that is impacting us. So I talk with my sons in developmentally respectful ways about the things that we inherit, so that there are times our bodies are reacting to things that may be experiences of our ancestors. So we talk about ancestors, talk about the experiences they may have had, talk about how that can show up in our body, and how using breath work and taking care of our bodies physically and mentally helps us to heal from the things that may have happened in our ancestry. So we are talking about all of that. And I use a framework from the neurosequential model of therapeutics, Dr. Bruce Perry's work. With them, I use it with myself, of focusing on this sequence of engagement, this way of engaging ourselves in the world that honors our inner life and need for self-regulation. And the focus there is to regulate ourselves before we try to do anything else, be in relationship to someone else or thinking about something or trying to learn something. Self-regulation is so key, and we can do that through rhythm and repeated patterns of experiences that are regulating, often movement oriented, like going for a walk or swimming or drawing or coloring, micro and macro kinds of movement that helps to regulate the nervous system. And then once we're regulated, we can be in relationship to someone else. We can sit down and have a conversation or share our story. Also, being just present with someone in parallel is regulating. So we don't have to talk. We can just be side by side. You don't have to tell me what's going on. I'm here. And then that educational piece and teaching them about what's happening with their bodies, the integration of their experiences with their physical self, and that you can't pull it apart. It's all part of a whole. Those are things we talk about in our home. And thankful for Resma Manicum's work. I have to shout him out because that ancestral piece is essential for us. We are the descendants of enslaved African people.
And Habeebah, I love again, the transparency, because I think in the world today, there is such a lack of that, from the way that, you parent. Even with me, I'm very open with everybody who knows me. Oh yeah, today's my therapy day. This is where I'll be at. So sayonara, you won't see me on social media. And a lot of times I am open when I talk about what I just went through with my therapist. Sometimes my therapist and I are ready to go through a WWE SmackDown match. But honestly, I'm thankful for those moments, because obviously that is a lesson, right? My therapist has said something that challenged something that I didn't agree with, and that's okay. Now I have something to work towards, instead of, oh, I'm firing this person. No, they want my best interest at heart. So I'm sticking with them. I don't want a yes man. I want somebody who's going to challenge me and help me to grow. Like I tell people, the comfort zone is equivalent to planting a seed in a drought. A seed in a drought is not going to grow. A seed in a drought is just going to stay right there. And I think, Habeebah, you were spot on. I think we need to be more transparent, be more open in our dialogue, and be vulnerable, right? Because I think when we reach a certain age, when we become parents or adults, we tend to kind of fawn when it comes to having certain discussions and conversations with our kids, because we don't want to look foolish. But one of my coaches said it best: don't be afraid to suck at something new. And when they said that, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stick with that for my life, because, we all have been in the space of student for at some point in our life. And I've adopted that student for life mindset. So for me, it has been a game changer. And I truly appreciate, Habeebah, that you keep that open dialogue with people. And I hope that our listeners are able to really include that, into their daily life, whether it's mothers and fathers, to really have these open dialogues with their children, and not be afraid to not know something, right? Because I feel like that's an opportunity for, hey, we can go on kind of like our own little adventure and go to a museum or go to the library and read, or, that's an activity, right? So, me, I'm full of ideas.
Well, and all of those things contribute to mental health, right? Like, we could go on and on. I could go on and on about how you don't need to go sit with someone with a bunch of letters behind their name to maintain your mental health. There are things that we can do every day to self-regulate, to get into community. The way human beings have thrived on this planet is not because we had enough PhDs, social workers, counselors, and school psychs like me. It's because we got into community and we had rituals of healing. We need to reclaim those rituals as people of the global majority, and especially African descent. We're displaced from much of that, but human beings in generally have been displaced from much of that. So we can reclaim the traditions that were ways of living, ways of being that were reparative and healing. And you went to healers when you were in most need. And so the community of mental health practitioners are there for us, and we're keeping ourselves accountable to be safe places. And there is lots going on in our community, arts, culture, athletics, that help to support our well-being day to day.
Yes, absolutely. That community piece is so essential. And we have to learn to bring that unity back in, instead of continuing to, unfortunately, keep it outside of the gate. Bring it more inclusive.
And understand, like, there are institutional and systemic factors that are barriers that we have to work together to dismantle so that we can get into community with one another.
Yes, 100%. Ooh, Habeebah, I knew this conversation was definitely worth the wait. And we're going to be wrapping up here soon, Habeebah. And I thank you again from the bottom of my heart for coming on and sharing so much with our listeners today, whether it's mothers or fathers and even just young people, to really take ownership of their mental well-being, and that things can change, things can shift, but it starts with us. Habeebah, what words of inspiration can you leave with our listeners today, whether it's someone who is once in your shoes, or if it's someone who is currently in the mental wellness space and they want to be more open to really helping more people to eliminate that stigma on mental well-being? What words of inspiration, Habeebah, can you leave with our listeners today?
There is so much, there is a wealth of knowledge within us and beyond us. My advice or my hope for the community is that we will seek to more deeply know ourselves and use strategies like journaling and narrating our own stories, to more deeply understand ourselves, and then look at the world around us and see what resonates for me. Where are there tools and techniques and supports that really resonate for me? Is it arts? Is it spoken word? Is it music or some other form of expression? Is it athletics and movement? There are ways of tapping into healing modalities that we can start to look out at the world at now. And then the last thing I would say is, I'm saying this to myself as much as I'm saying it to the listeners: trust your inner wisdom. Trust that the creator is channeling to you what is for you and what is your work and your purpose. Trust that. Seek out the ways of expressing and tapping into that. I think that brings joy. And for me, trusting my inner wisdom and the wisdom of the creator to move into the podcasting space was one of those moments of just trusting that I had something meaningful to add to the human experience.
Yes, that trust in the divine timing is crucial to every part of growth in our life. Well, everybody, that was Habeebah Rasheed Grimes that you heard from. And that concludes another episode of Grew with Portia, everybody. Thanks for listening and have a great and awesome evening, everybody.